I thought the worst day of my life was finding out my wife was cheating. Turns out, that was the day my real journey began, a journey that would take me across continents and into a future I never saw coming. I stood quietly in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel in downtown Albany, just a few blocks from the Capitol building. It was a Thursday night, around 10 p.m. But I wasn't there to check in or unwind. I had come for a much darker reason. My wife, Melanie, was there too, just not with me. She was spending the evening with her boyfriend, blissfully unaware that I'd known about the affair for months. The knowledge of her betrayal had been gnawing at me ever since I discovered it, slowly eroding whatever peace of mind I had left. I couldn't stop asking myself what had gone wrong. Was I to blame? Had I somehow pushed her away and into the arms of another man? One thing was clear, I wasn't enough for her anymore, at least not in the ways that mattered. For a time, I considered letting her continue the affair, hoping that the thrill would eventually wear off and she'd come back to me. But deep down, I knew better. Once someone tastes the rush of something new, going back to the familiar is rarely an option. I waited for change that never came. Eventually, I had no choice but to face reality. It was better to end things now than let her deceit continue to tear me apart from the inside. So many questions haunted me, but the answers always seemed just beyond my reach. That's when I devised a plan. It wasn't flawless by any means, but it was better than doing nothing. I wasn't there to create a scene or get physical, that would accomplish nothing. My lawyer had already warned me that losing control would only make matters worse. I wasn't about to destroy my life over her or the man she was with. My goal was simple, end the facade and reclaim whatever dignity I had left, even if it meant making Melanie face the discomfort of the truth. Let me introduce myself. My name is Donald Taft. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Albany. Until recently, I worked as an emergency room doctor at the city's main hospital. I had to take a leave of absence because I was burnt out, running on fumes after years of relentless shifts. My own doctor finally insisted that I step away before the stress consumed me entirely. Before my exhaustion pushed me to the brink, I finally took a break from work. I never told Melanie about my time off, though. Why bother? She wouldn't have cared. That's just who she is, cold, self-absorbed, and indifferent to my struggles. Melanie is 32 and works as a loan officer for a national bank in the city. We live in a spacious two-bedroom apartment near the hospital, and thankfully, we don't have any children. She's a head-turner, 5 feet 8 inches, with long brown hair that always draws attention. Everywhere we go, men notice her. It's not hard to see why. I met her back in college, in an English class I was taking to fulfill a general requirement. As a science major, I wasn't exactly passionate about literature, but Melanie quickly became the only reason I cared about that class. I asked her out, and things took off from there. After graduation, we lived together for a couple of years before tying the knot, right after I finished medical school. I was fortunate enough to graduate without student debt, thanks to my parents' support. Still, I worked every summer to contribute to my education. My dad owns a construction company, and he had me doing manual labor on his job sites for minimum wage. I learned the value of hard work early on and carried that ethic into my medical career. Now, as an ER doctor, I earn a solid income, $180,000 last year alone, and Melanie brings in around $90,000. Financially, we're doing well. My potential earnings are huge. In just a few years, I could be making upwards of $600,000 annually. We had ambitious plans for the future, starting a family, buying a house in the suburbs, building the life we always talked about. At least, that's what I thought. It's clear now that Melanie had other ideas. I learned about her affair purely by chance. One of the nurses from the ER, who had met Melanie at a holiday party, spotted her at a downtown restaurant. She wasn't alone. She was with Kane, her boyfriend. The nurse recognized him, I'll explain how later, and that's how the truth reached me. Tonight, I watched that truth unfold before my very eyes. Standing in the Hilton lobby, I saw Melanie and Kane enter hand in hand. They walked across the polished floor without a care in the world and stepped into an elevator. I noted the button he pressed, 12th floor, just before the doors shut behind them. I remained in the lobby, glancing at my watch, reviewing my plan in my head one more time. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something far more important, regaining control of my life. I had reached my breaking point. The constant disrespect, the lies, I'd had enough. It was time to put an end to it and reclaim my dignity. I walked up to the front desk and asked to be connected to Kane Ezen's room. Kane is a local businessman who runs a landscaping and property maintenance company. He's married with 2 children, yet somehow found it acceptable to carry on a secret affair with my wife. For nearly 2 years, Melanie and Kane had been seeing each other behind my back. The day I discovered the affair was like a gut punch, raw, painful, and impossible to ignore. The truth had been exposed by pure coincidence. A nurse I worked with casually mentioned seeing Melanie dining at a downtown restaurant with a friend. That friend was Kane. At the time, I was drowning in the chaos of another grueling 18-hour shift at the ER, dealing with stabbings, shootings, and all the other life-or-death crises that come with the job. Meanwhile, Melanie was out enjoying a cozy dinner with her lover. The nurse recognized Kane because his landscaping company had recently completed a project for her husband. And just like that, the web of lies Melanie had spun for years unraveled in an instant. A few days later, I decided to test the waters. As we sat at the kitchen table, I mentioned casually that Carol, the nurse, had seen Melanie at the restaurant with a friend. I didn't drop Kane's name but instead joked about how we should try the place out sometime. The reaction was immediate. Melanie froze, her face going pale for just a moment. She quickly collected herself, brushing it off with a vague, "It was fine," before changing the subject. That brief flash of panic in her eyes told me all I needed to know. From that moment on, I knew I had to act. The following week, I confided in my father. I explained that I suspected Melanie was cheating on me. He was both shocked and deeply disappointed. He had always liked Melanie and had been thrilled at the idea of us starting a family. We spent hours talking through the situation, working out a strategy to protect me in the event of a divorce. He promised to keep everything between us, not even telling my mother, who would be heartbroken. Next, I spoke with my hospital supervisor. I explained the personal crisis I was facing, and though she was sympathetic, I could tell she was disheartened. She knew Melanie well and had always been fond of her. Still, she agreed that I needed time off and arranged a 3-month leave so I could handle things. I also sought out the hospital psychiatrist, who fully supported my decision, noting the extreme stress I'd been under for years. The pieces of my plan were falling into place. All that remained now was the confrontation itself. With the support of my father, my supervisor, and the psychiatrist, I was finally able to shift my focus toward untangling the mess that was my marriage. I knew I couldn't handle it all on my own, so I hired a private investigator to confirm what I already suspected. Within a week, I had detailed reports and photographs that left no doubt about Melanie's affair with Kane. Seeing those images hit me like a sledgehammer, but there was also a strange sense of relief. It was the proof I needed to close this chapter for good. Despite the pain, I found myself thinking about life beyond this disaster. I dreamed of taking a long journey, maybe riding my motorcycle across the Rockies and then down the West Coast. It would take months, giving me the time and space I needed to process and heal. I even toyed with the idea of volunteering with Doctors Without Borders for a year or 2. Anything to hit the reset button on my life. But first, I had to deal with Melanie. Once and for all. That night, I walked into the Hilton Hotel with one goal, to confront her and Kane. I went straight to the front desk and asked to speak with Kane Ezen. The clerk rang his room, and after a moment, Kane's voice came on the line. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "May I speak to Melanie?" I asked, my voice low but firm. There was a long pause on the other end. I imagined him glancing nervously at her, possibly mouthing the question to see how she wanted to handle it. Every second felt like an eternity. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I tightened my grip on the phone. This was it, the moment when their secret world would come crashing down. Later that night, Melanie returned to our apartment, expecting the same life she'd been living, one where I worked endless shifts, none the wiser to her double life. Instead, she found silence. The place was eerily quiet. She called my name, but there was no reply. Then, on the kitchen table, she spotted an envelope with her name scribbled across the front. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was my wedding ring and a single sheet of paper. The note was simple and devastating. "Melanie, you can consider me dead. Our marriage has been over for a long time." Reality hit her all at once. The affair with Kane had seemed so easy, so harmless at the time. She had convinced herself that sneaking away once or twice a week wouldn't hurt anyone. It was just a brief escape from her responsibilities, or so she thought. Now, standing in the empty apartment, the weight of her choices crushed her. I was gone, and for the first time, she understood there might be no way to fix what she had broken. Desperately, she grabbed her phone to call me, but the number had already been disconnected. In a panic, she called my parents. My father answered, his voice ice-cold. "Donald has left," he said. "And as far as I'm concerned, you can go to hell." The line went dead. Melanie stood there, alone, finally facing the consequences of her lies. Meanwhile, I had left the city behind. I checked into a holiday inn across the river, mentally and physically drained. All I wanted was a hot shower, a warm meal, and a bed. It wasn't luxurious, but that hotel room marked the beginning of something new, a small step toward reclaiming my life. "Please, I need to talk to him," Melanie pleaded, desperation lacing her voice. "Just ask him to call me." But the clerk's face remained stony and unmoved. There was no sympathy to be found there. Defeated, Melanie left the hotel and returned to our apartment. What awaited her wasn't comfort, it was another blow. Taped to the door was a letter from my attorney, Amanda Holman. With trembling fingers, she tore it open and read the words that would dismantle the remnants of her former life. The letter left no room for ambiguity. Effective immediately, Melanie was removed from my health insurance plan. Our joint finances had been divided, and I had changed the beneficiary of my life insurance to my parents. I wanted no further contact with her. The message was brutal but clear: if she wanted to communicate with me, it would have to go through my lawyer. She was officially cut off from the life we had built together. While Melanie was grappling with the consequences of her betrayal, I had already moved on, literally and mentally. After my motorcycle broke down, I found myself in a nearby city known for its charming hotels and lively restaurants. I checked into a small, cozy hotel in the heart of the city. That evening, I went for a long walk, reflecting on how far I'd come in just a few short weeks. For the first time in years, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and clarity. I could finally breathe again. The hotel in St. Matthews became a sanctuary of sorts. It provided the space I needed to unwind, do my laundry, and recharge both physically and emotionally. The inviting bar and restaurant added to the sense of peace. It was a place where I could pause and simply exist without the weight of my past. During my travels, I met a woman named Greta, a seasoned biker who had already covered over 40,000 kilometers. She had ambitious plans to tour Africa's coastline, a goal far more daring than my intended route through North America. Her courage and sense of adventure stirred something in me. Inspired by her journey, I called my father to discuss changing my own plans. I expected him to be cautious or worried, but to my surprise, he encouraged me wholeheartedly. "Do what feels right for you," he said. His words echoed through my mind long after our call ended. With that renewed sense of purpose, I reached out to Greta to ask if she'd be open to me joining her on part of her African adventure. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was choosing a path not defined by my past pain, but by my desire to truly live again. I wasn't sure if Greta had someone waiting for her back home, but at that moment, it didn't matter. We were on the road together, and each day brought new challenges and experiences. I had to be strategic about fuel since my Africa Twin, with its larger engine, guzzled more gas than Greta's BMW. I learned the hard way to carry extra fuel and ended up using it on more than one occasion. Realizing I needed better preparation for future trips, I decided that an auxiliary fuel tank was a must. Mechanical issues were inevitable, and when my bike broke down in the middle of nowhere, we spent 3 frustrating hours fixing it on the side of the road. It was tough, but Greta's calm, practical attitude kept us moving forward. Her presence had a grounding effect on me. Even when things got rough, like sleeping in the unforgiving desert, the connection we shared in that cramped little tent made it all worth it. There's something unforgettable about those moments, where discomfort and beauty coexist, and you find a strange kind of peace. With new horizons calling, we pushed further south toward Darar, the capital city of Senegal. Darar was unlike any place I'd ever seen. The streets were alive with a chaotic, almost hypnotic energy. Expensive cars and battered scooters weaved through the traffic like a carefully choreographed dance, a stark reflection of the city's deep wealth divide. Yet, no matter their circumstances, everyone seemed focused on survival, doing whatever it took to provide for their families. After the exhausting days spent crossing the desert, I insisted we take a proper break and booked us a hotel near the beach. We needed the rest, and Darar's coastal views provided a perfect moment of calm. Greta and I shared some incredible days there, enjoying the local sights and each other's company in a way that felt both passionate and restorative. We eventually arranged for our motorcycles to be shipped ahead by air, and 2 days later, we boarded an old cargo plane bound for Windhoek. The flight itself was nerve-wracking, the plane rattled in the turbulent winds, and the pilots looked like they were barely out of flight school, but when we finally landed and saw our bikes waiting for us, I let out a huge sigh of relief. From there, the ride to Cape Town took 5 days, filled with breathtaking views and unforgettable moments. Each night brought us closer, the bond we shared deepening with every mile we traveled. When the journey came to an end, I knew I had changed. The adventure had not only healed parts of me but also awakened a passion for life I thought I'd lost forever. Back in the city, I tried to settle into my routine again. One evening, I joined my friends Matthew and Megan for dinner. The moment I walked in, Megan greeted me with a warm hug. "Donald, how are you? We've missed you," she said, her voice full of genuine care. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of belonging, not because of what I'd been through, but because of the people who reminded me I was still valued. "I'm good, thanks for asking," I replied, handing small gifts to Matthew and Megan's kids. They squealed with excitement and ran off to play. Megan didn't waste any time getting to the heart of the matter. "Alright, let's get to the real question, what happened between you and Melanie? Why did you leave?" I chuckled, deflecting her directness. "Good to see you too, Megan. A beer would be great." Matthew took the hint and headed to grab drinks, giving me a moment to collect my thoughts. It wasn't that I didn't trust them with the truth, but talking about Melanie was still painful. The trip with Greta had changed me in ways I hadn't fully processed yet. My outlook on life had shifted, and the thought of going back to my old routine, returning to the hospital and pretending everything was normal, felt unbearable. Being back in Albany was a bitter reminder of my failed marriage. Thinking about Melanie still left a sour taste in my mouth. Her deception had cut deep, and I had vowed never to let myself be that vulnerable again. My travels had shown me that good, honest women do exist, women with integrity who wouldn't betray their partners. If Melanie had just been honest with me from the start, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled the way they did. But there was no point dwelling on the what-ifs anymore. After some time reconnecting with friends, I finally returned to the ER. Stepping back into that world felt like diving straight into chaos. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, stabbings, it was all familiar, yet somehow distant after my time in Africa. There, the medical challenges were different. People lived simpler lives, ate healthier, and were more active. Here, I was quickly reminded of America's battles with obesity and chronic disease. Heart attacks and strokes were as common as ever, but my perspective had changed. 2 weeks after returning, I met with my attorney to finalize the divorce. There wasn't much to divide, no kids, no ongoing disputes, but seeing everything spelled out in black and white still stung. It was the official end of a chapter one didn't want to revisit. A few days later, my attorney emailed to confirm that Melanie had been served. If she didn't contest or delay, we'd meet the legal requirements for an uncontested divorce in 6 months. It was a straightforward process, but it carried the weight of closure I hadn't fully prepared for. This was it, definitive, final. That evening, I was deep in thought when my doorbell buzzed. I froze for a moment, then slowly made my way to the door. When I opened it, there she was. "I'm Melanie," she said softly, as if I didn't already know. 2 nights ago, Melanie had followed me after seeing me leave the hospital. She must have been desperate, trying to find some way to talk to me, but she hadn't gotten far. And now, here she was, standing right in front of me. I hesitated at first. My emotions clashed, anger, confusion, and something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Against my better judgment, I allowed her inside. In those brief seconds it took her to step through the door, my mind raced. Why was she here? What did she want? I reminded myself that I had moved on. I was stronger now, in a better place both mentally and emotionally. Taking a deep breath, I faced her head on. When I saw her standing there, I couldn't help but notice how good she looked, though there was a weariness to her, perhaps the toll of everything finally catching up with her. She hesitated at the threshold, her eyes searching mine. I widened the door and gestured for her to come in. "Hi, Melanie," I greeted, my voice steady. She walked in slowly, her gaze darting nervously around the room before finally settling on me. "When I got home and saw your note with the wedding ring. I was in shock," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached into her bag and pulled out my gold ring, setting it on the table between us. I stared at it like it was a toxic artifact from another life. I didn't reach for it, didn't even flinch. "I tried to contact your family," she continued, almost pleading. "But no one would talk to me. Your dad, he kept telling me to go to hell. And I guess I deserved that. Donald, since you left, my life has been a nightmare," she said, hoping for some sign of empathy. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before finally speaking. "What did you expect me to do, Melanie?" She bit her lip, unable to answer right away. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to how it was overnight. I want us to live together again. To try to be lovers again. To have the family we dreamed of. Donald, please." I stared at her in disbelief. "Jesus, Melanie, you're delusional," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not going to be your husband for even a single day longer than I have to. My lawyer is ready to move forward. In New York, 6 months of separation is enough to file for divorce if the marriage is irretrievably broken. And you've done a damn good job of breaking it. It's over, Melanie. We are over." Her face crumpled as my words hit her like a brick wall. The reality sank in, and for the first time, she seemed to truly grasp what she had lost. The life we had, the dreams we once shared, they were gone. I had loved her, deeply, but she had thrown it all away for a fleeting thrill that didn't even matter. Cain had gotten what he wanted, and she was left with nothing but regret. There was nothing more to say. A short time later, Melanie signed the divorce papers. She didn't argue, didn't try to delay. She knew there was no salvaging this. And with that final signature, I was free. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I'm Donald," I muttered under my breath, half joking. "Yay. I'm divorced. I'm finally divorced," I said aloud, holding the finalized papers in my hands. It was official, Melanie and I were no longer married. Relief washed over me, a liberating sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I was free. Free to start fresh and build a new life, no longer shackled by the weight of betrayal and heartache. Greta had been a constant presence in my thoughts ever since our time in Africa. We had shared more than just an adventure, we had shared moments that redefined who I was. After the long flight to Berlin, I checked into the Park View Hotel at Alexanderplatz. Compared to the basic lodgings Greta and I had stayed in while traveling across Africa, this place felt like pure luxury. The room's comfort was a welcome reprieve after the exhausting journey. After a quick shower and a light snack, I set out to find Greta's office. Google Maps made it easy, just a 15-minute walk through the bustling streets of Berlin. As I strolled toward her workplace, I tried to manage my expectations. Showing up unannounced could go one of two ways: either she'd be happy to see me, or she'd wonder what on earth I was doing there. When I arrived and spotted her, I felt a rush of emotions. Greta looked entirely different from how I remembered her in Africa. She was no longer in dusty riding gear. Instead, she wore a flowing black skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a pair of elegant heels that clicked softly on the polished floor. She looked every bit the professional, yet I couldn't help but see flashes of the fearless woman who had guided me through desert storms and endless stretches of open road. She greeted me with a bright smile. "Donald. What are you doing here?" I returned her smile and replied, "I wanted to surprise you. I cleaned up first, I didn't want to look like a vagrant and get thrown out by security." She laughed, taking my hand and leading me to her editing room. "Come on, I want to show you what I've been working on." As she walked beside me, I couldn't help but reflect on how surreal it was to be here. It felt like a lifetime ago when we were huddled in a tiny tent under the vast African sky. She might have looked different now, but the connection between us was just as strong. Greta paused at the door to her office and glanced back at me, her expression softening. "Did you miss me as much as I missed you?" she asked quietly. I didn't need to answer with words. The moment the door closed behind us, she pulled me into a kiss. It was both familiar and electric, a spark reigniting between us. In that instant, all the doubts and pain I had carried melted away. Holding her, I felt more alive than I had in years, like I was finally breathing freely after months of suffocating uncertainty. For the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Greta was here. We were here. And the future was wide open. For the first time in ages, I could finally breathe. Greta was everything to me in that moment, perfect, grounded, and the spark of joy I didn't know I needed. Over the next few days, our bond only deepened. One evening, she mentioned visiting her aunt in Florida, near Tampa. "My aunt loves the beach," Greta said with a laugh. "She claims it helps with her arthritis." Her laughter was contagious, and I found myself grinning along with her. "We can take the train to my parents' house tomorrow if you want. It's about a 6-hour ride." "Where do they live?" I asked, curious. "In the south," she replied. "My dad worked for Volkswagen as an engineer before retiring, and my mom used to be an accountant. I'll call them tonight to let them know we're coming." I mulled it over and decided to go with the flow. There was a lightness to this new life, one I didn't want to let go of. Over dinner that night, I confessed something that had been weighing on my mind. "I don't think I can stay in Albany," I admitted. "The hospital wants me back, and the pay is good, but there's just too much history there. I need a fresh start, maybe explore another part of the world." Greta raised an eyebrow and gave me a playful smile. "Sounds like someone caught the travel bug." Well, that's mostly your fault, I teased. She laughed again, a warm sound that made me feel lighter than I'd felt in years. The next morning, we packed our bags and made plans to visit her parents. After a quick stop at her apartment to grab a few essentials, we took a cab to the train station. I've always loved European trains, efficient, sleek, and so much more relaxed than anything back home. Greta's excitement was evident, and soon, we were on our way. When we arrived, her parents greeted us warmly. I could feel the curiosity in their eyes, as if silently asking, "So, who's this man with our daughter?" Wanting to break the ice, I turned to her father and said, "So, Greta tells me you worked for Volkswagen." That was all the encouragement Thomas needed. He launched into a detailed explanation of his career as an engineer, diving into the intricacies of production systems and the precision of German manufacturing. I listened attentively, nodding and asking questions to show my interest. Meanwhile, Greta's mother, Elizabeth, stayed mostly quiet but radiated a gentle warmth that made me feel welcome. By bedtime, I fully expected to be given a separate room from Greta. To my surprise, Elizabeth had set out fresh towels for both of us in the same room. As Greta and I settled into bed that night, I decided to be respectful and kept things low-key. After all, we were under her parents' roof, and I wasn't about to test their hospitality on the first night. As we lay there, I reached for her hand under the covers, giving it a gentle squeeze. She squeezed back, her presence calming me. For the first time, I felt not just peace but a sense of possibility, like maybe this was the beginning of something real and lasting. Greta had helped me rediscover who I was, and I wasn't going to take that for granted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still under quiet scrutiny. The last thing I wanted was to give Greta's parents a reason to disapprove of me. As I climbed into bed, wearing boxers and a t-shirt, I noticed Greta watching me with a knowing smile. She saw right through my hesitation but said nothing, simply reaching for my hand under the covers to reassure me. Her warmth steadied me, and for the first time in a long while, my hopes for a new future felt entirely within reach. The next morning, I couldn't wait any longer. My heart raced as I rummaged through my bag, hands trembling slightly. I pulled out a small velvet box I had brought with me, just in case. This was the moment. I turned to face Greta and, with a deep breath, opened the box to reveal a ring. "Will you marry me?" I asked softly, searching her eyes for a reaction. Greta's eyes filled with tears, and her face lit up with sheer joy. "Yes. Yes. Yes," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. We hugged tightly, holding on to each other as if the world around us had faded into a blur. After a moment, I realized we needed to share the news. I quickly got dressed and opened the door, ready to tell her parents, only to find Thomas and Elizabeth standing there in the hallway, curious expressions on their faces. They didn't need me to say a word. Elizabeth's eyes darted to the ring still on Greta's hand, and she immediately pulled us both into a warm embrace. Thomas clapped me on the back with a grin, offering a hearty congratulations. When we returned to the States, the whirlwind of wedding plans and family excitement began. My mother and Elizabeth quickly entered a friendly competition to see who could claim the title of Best Future Grandma, while my dad and Thomas bonded over ambitious ideas for renovating and expanding our home. Their energy was infectious, though honestly, I struggled to keep up and didn't even try. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I marveled at how far I'd come. Losing Melanie had been devastating at the time, but her betrayal had ultimately been a blessing in disguise. It had freed me to find something real, something that filled my life with joy instead of pain. Meeting Greta had been a stroke of pure luck, a chance encounter that changed everything. If I hadn't gotten a flat tire that day back in Africa, I might never have crossed paths with her. Now, as I stood on the threshold of this new life, I felt nothing but gratitude. The pain of the past was gone, replaced by hope and love. Greta was my future, and I couldn't wait to build that future with her.